I'd like to welcome you to the College Lady presentation of financial aid and the next steps that you're going to be asked to complete. And first, I want to say that the College Lady means me, Diana Blitz, and Magda Moores and Wendy Lubick, who are both on board here tonight. And tonight, we're going to hear from Jeff Levy, who is an educational consultant, a financial aid specialist, and a very generous friend. Jeff will be delving into the intricacies of the FAFSA, the Federal Financial Aid Form, the CSS Profile, which many private and a few public schools use. He will explain the best way to complete the forms, touching on questions about multiple kids in college, divorced parents, unresponsive parents, and everything in between. Then Jeff will cover the CSS profile and how to do that effectively and efficiently. Of course, we're going to leave time to answer your questions for as long as that happens. Tonight, we are going to be recording this session. And as always, we believe in pay it forward. If you have friends that have questions about financial aid, please feel free to share either the video or answer any questions you have. We want people to be informed and to do this efficiently and effectively. So Jeff, if you'd like to come on.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so Wendy, you're going to continue to let people in, and we're going to begin. Okay, Jeff, as you know, every college on the Common App asks students if they intend to apply for need-based aid. This requires a simple yes or no. We sent our families information about the consequences of answering yes or no, but I think your more detailed explanation will be a good launching point for our discussion about financial aid tonight.
First of all, Diana, Wendy, Magda, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come here tonight and to speak to your families. There is so much confusion out there and a lot of a lack of transparency concerning financial aid. I come at this from the background of being a parent who knew nothing, literally nothing about financial aid and college affordability. So if you are confused about anything, and if there's anything I say tonight that doesn't answer your question or leaves you unclear about the answer, please ask the question. Diana, are they asking questions in the chat? How is that working?
Right. I want to just say that you are muted and that you can ask questions in the chat. That would be the easiest, and we'll be picking up your questions from there.
You scared me. I thought you said I was muted. Okay. And so thank you, Diana and Magda and Wendy, for the opportunity. Okay, to your question. Yes, every college or nearly every college asks in their college specific questions on the Common App and other applications, do you intend, and they're addressing the student, of course, do you intend to apply for need-based financial aid? It's my strong opinion that every question asked on the Common App should be answered accurately and truthfully. And if you are a family that does intend to apply for financial aid, that should be checked yes. And then you should follow through with submitting the forms that that particular college requires. Every college requires the FAFSA for financial aid consideration. And as Diana mentioned a moment ago, about 185, mostly private, mostly the more selective institutions also require the CSS profile. If you don't expect to apply for financial aid, and that's a choice, and we're going to get into that tonight, and I don't want to monologue, but I do believe we're going to get into that conversation. But if you do choose, after weighing the pros and cons, not to apply for need-based financial aid, then the applicant should check that box no, and the family should not submit the FAFSA and CSS profile, because if they, by the institution's deadline, because if they do, then there's this misalignment. The institution is getting two conflicting pieces of information. One from the student saying, I'm applying for financial aid, or I'm not applying for financial aid. And then they find out, the admission office finds out from the financial aid office, wait, we received this FAFSA from that student. So it's just creating a confusing situation. And I just think it's really important not to do that, because the school is going to do one of three things. They're going to reach out to you to clear up this conflicting information. So you're having them do more work than they should. Two, they may ignore what the student selected on the Common App, and they may say, oh, we got your FAFSA, so of course you're applying for financial aid. Or three, they may honor what the student said in the application, that they're not applying for financial aid, and disregard your FAFSA and or CSS profile. So it's just for all kinds of reasons. It's important to be accurate and to be truthful.
Jeff, a follow-up question to that. Is it possible to say yes to some colleges and no to others?
Absolutely. So the FAFSA and the CSS profile belong to the student. The questions are addressed to the student. The FAFSA is a federal form. Both of these forms are signed by the student and the parent. So you can absolutely decide, you've got the choice which schools to apply to for financial aid and which not. There are, is this a good time to get into the pros and cons of?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so obviously, if you're a family, I shouldn't say obviously, but we all know that college is ridiculously expensive. If you're a family for whom a $70,000 or $75,000 or $80,000 price tag annually per child is not a burden, wonderful, you're blessed. But for most families, that kind of price tag is a significant burden. For some families, the most expensive purchase they're ever going to make in their lives over the course of 4 years. If the price tag of a college is not something you can afford, and you think you may be eligible for need-based aid, then you should absolutely submit the FAFSA and any other forms required. If you're on the other end of the spectrum and you've done your homework, and there are ways to do the homework to get an early read on whether you're need eligible or not, and I strongly suggest doing that as early as possible. And the price tag of college is not a burden. And even in the event of some sort of major financial event, loss of a job, loss of a home, you have the assets to pull you through. Then you may decide, you know what, it's not worth submitting the FAFSA and other forms, because full pay families can get an advantage, or full pay applicants can get an advantage in the application process, in the application review process. Why? Because colleges need full pay families to help underwrite all of those families who do require some need-based aid. I will say this, and I'll try to not monologue too much longer, but I will say this, that colleges are not in the business of admitting the cheapest class in their history. They're in the business of admitting the best class in their history. So they are going in the first round of reading applications, they're looking for the most extraordinary applicants, whether they have financial need or not. But as they get closer and closer to filling the class, to completing on paper who their freshman class will be, they are certainly looking at all of their institutional needs and goals. And one of those needs is to meet their target tuition, net tuition revenue. They have to, they're businesses. So toward the latter stages of creating this class on paper before the acceptance letters go out, a student with need, an applicant with need, may be disadvantaged relative to a full pay applicant who has checked the box, no, I'm not applying for need-based aid, and has followed through by not submitting the FAFSA and CSS profile.
Okay, so Jeff, what you've just explained to us, that there is a direct connection between the FAFSA and that question that are you applying for need-based aid? And because some families have not seen that they are connected. So you've explained to us that not all families need to complete the FAFSA, but can you tell us now about well, let me just go back and say, in fact, just to reiterate, if you're checking on the box that I'm applying for need-based aid to X college, then there should be a FAFSA that's completed, and then and when we get into the weeds of how to complete the FAFSA, that college should be listed on the FAFSA.
Correct.
Correct. And when I asked you about, do you have to submit the FAFSA for all colleges, you said, no, we do not. But what that means is you submit the FAFSA and you list the colleges that you chose to say yes to, and you leave out the colleges that you said I am not applying.
Right. So as I know you're advising your students, Diana, every time you submit the Common App to a particular college, you now, didn't used to be true, but now you have the ability to edit that Common App before you click submit to any particular college. So absolutely, if there are some schools where maybe they're much less expensive and you know for a fact that you're not going to qualify for need, maybe your child is on the edge of admissibility and you think that by applying as a full pay applicant, you might advantage them, then you can certainly select for that college, no, I'm not applying for need-based aid, and make sure that college is not listed on the FAFSA when it's submitted. And the FAFSA typically is filled out once online, listing all of the colleges that you are applying for financial aid from, and then submitted one time. There are ways to go in and amend it, and we can maybe get into that later. But yeah, so I would have that list known before you submit the FAFSA.
Right. So I'm just going to talk to our DC families for 1 second. If you live in DC and you make less than about $500,000 of taxable income per year, and you plan to apply to any state school, then you are eligible for DC tag. And to get DC tag, one of the steps you need to do is to complete the FAFSA. But what we tell families, if you are not applying for need-based aid, and so therefore we're not planning to submit the FAFSA, you cannot apply for DC tag until beginning in February through the end of the school year. So our suggestion to you is do not complete the FAFSA and start the application process for DC tag until well after February, even into March and April, when admission decisions are already made and it does not complicate the situation. So Jeff, the application, the FAFSA comes out and the CSS profile come out October 1. Before, my next question is going to be, tell us what we do. But my first question is, when are they due?
And I see that is a question in the chat. So thank you for asking it. Here's where it starts to get really annoying. The FAFSA does come out and the CSS profile does come out October 1st. That's the first day you can access it, complete it, and submit it if you want to submit it in the same day, but there's no hurry to do that. The due date varies college by college. So if you're, and it varies according to what round the student is applying it. So if your child is applying, let's say early action with a November 1st application deadline, that college may have a financial aid application deadline of as early as November 1st. So this is not Diana's job, but it's the parent's job to keep track of that, to go on to the financial aid website of every college your child is applying to, keep a little spreadsheet, and make note of when the financial aid deadlines are and which forms they require. You do not want to miss those deadlines. So what this means then in practice is if one of the schools on your child's list has a November 1st deadline, and another one, where I'm from in California, the UCs, the University of California campuses, have a March 2nd deadline, you want to submit the FAFSA by November 1st, because by the earliest deadline of all the schools you're applying to. Otherwise, you're missing a deadline, and that will seriously jeopardize your child's eligibility for need-based aid.
Okay. Okay. So now can you tell us how to complete the FAFSA and what we need to know before we begin? And of course, do both parents need to do it if there are two? In other words, Jeff, can you do sort of a verbal review of your comprehensively compiled 21 important tips to completing the FAFSA and CSS profile?
The answer is no, I can't do that. I'd have to read them and reacquaint myself with them. But so like everything else, it's more complicated than it should be. Here are some of the important things you should know about how to begin to fill out the FAFSA. Your child needs an FSA ID number. That's their federal digital fingerprint. And that is associated with your child only. A parent, if the child is a dependent under the age of 24, the parent will also need to sign the FAFSA, which means they need their own FSA ID. Now, the websites have gotten a lot better. If you just Google create my FSA, Federal Student Aid ID, you will get right to the page on the studentaid.gov website where that is done. My strong recommendation, your child should do it first, and then you do it next. Second recommendation, have your child log into the FAFSA first as the student, and then if you want to follow up and complete the form for them, by all means follow up, but you will need, by law, you cannot use your child's FSA ID. It's theirs and theirs alone. What did I leave out, Diana?
What else what's next?
So they're what they're going to be looking at. So if these are the parents of seniors, correct? Mostly in your audience. That means that tells me that your child will be enrolling in college in the fall of 2023, correct?
Mhm.
The FAFSA and CSS profile look at your tax returns, your income, from 2 years prior to the year your child enrolls in college. So if they're enrolling in college as freshmen in 2023, they are looking at your 2021 taxes. If you haven't done them yet, do them as soon as possible, because you can't submit the FAFSA. I mean, there are ways to do it, but you don't want to be one of those people. It's very complicated. Have your taxes done, your 2021 taxes done before you sit down to do this, and you have time, since it's 3 or so weeks away before it even opens. Now, at that point, you've got your FSA IDs, you're into the FAFSA, you're starting to answer the questions. One of the first questions that you will be asked is, would you like to use the IRS data retrieval tool, DRT? And I recommend in most circumstances you say yes. And that will make populating many of the questions on the FAFSA much, much easier. By saying yes to that, if your taxes have been filed and processed, usually that doesn't take very long after filing. Many of those questions will be automatically populated, but not with actual numbers you can see, but with hashtags for security purposes. The colleges get their version of your FAFSA a few days later, a few days after you submit, and they will, of course, see the numbers. But for some crazy reason, they don't allow the families themselves to see those numbers. What else should I get into here, Diana, in your opinion?
So, and if do both parents complete it?
Okay, great question. Thank you for asking. So there is also a question early on, and I'm reminding you that the questions are all addressed to the student, not to the parent. So when there's a question, what is the marital status of your parents? They're asking about you. They're not asking about the student's grandparents. If the marital status is divorced or separated, then there's a follow-up question this year, which changes next year, but I don't want to be too confusing yet. But for you guys this year, the follow-up question to the marital status, if divorced or separated is selected, is with which parent did you spend more time during this year to date, this past year to date? That parent becomes, by definition, the custodial parent, the parent with whom the child has spent more time during the past year. Even if the custody arrangement is 50-50 custody, doesn't matter. There's no such thing as 50-50, not to the second. I just don't believe it. So if it's roughly 50-50, my advice is make sure the custodial parent is the one with the lower EFC, the lower expected family contribution, the parent who has lower income, lower assets, if it's roughly 50-50. If if it's way out of whack, 70-30, and the 30%er lives out of state and nowhere near your child's high school, that's going to be a red flag. So, it's a federal form. Your child's name is on it. Your name is on it. You want to answer these questions honestly and accurately. But no one's putting a clock on it either. So just be smart in how you answer these questions. That's the FAFSA. CSS Profile, again, just to complicate it for you, is different. They are asking for, they want to know who the custodial parent is, like the FAFSA, but they also want to know the name and email address of the non-custodial parent, the parent who is not in the picture as much, and that parent's spouse. That parent will then be sent, in most cases, by most CSS Profile schools, a request by email for them to fill out their own CSS profile. The two are not commingled. One family doesn't see what the other is earning or what their assets are, but the financial aid office is collecting data from both parents at CSS Profile schools.
For the FAFSA, if there's divorced parents, would they each see each other's personal financial information?
Well, the non-custodial parent isn't listed and they're completely ignored. There's no way to even add their information. They're anonymous. They're not mentioned. So no, that doesn't happen.
Okay, so what if, and this happens every year for us, a parent is either non-responsive to the CSS profile when the colleges are requesting it, or refuses to complete it and says, I refuse to complete it, and virtually has nothing to do with the child, but you can't really check. I don't know anything about it. If the kid does know where the dad or the mom live, what happens?
So this is the non-custodial parent. You're
correct.
So there's a spectrum of situations. At one end, to protect the child and their custodial parent, if there is any kind of history of a court-ordered, what is that called again, when a parent has to stay away from the child?
Restraining order.
When there's a court-ordered restraining order, I mean, this is one end of the spectrum. There will be zero expectation that the family, that the child or her parent reach out to this other parent who's out of the picture, particularly if there's any, hint of possible endangerment. In that case, the family needs to reach out to the financial aid office to seek. So I would not mention the other parent's name. I would not try to put their email address down. You would contact the financial aid office and you would seek what's called a non-custodial parent waiver. Now, most cases are not that severe, and there are certainly plenty of cases where there's no danger, but the parent has disappeared. They're deadbeats, and they've taken no responsibility for the child's financial and emotional welfare. I think many of those cases would also qualify for a non-custodial waiver. But now, creeping a little more toward the middle of the spectrum, there are parents who are just jerks, frankly, non-custodial parents, who are in the picture, but they just don't want to take on the financial responsibility that they're required to do. If a parent seeks a non-custodial waiver in that case, in all cases, there is going to be a request for some documentation of the situation. And you don't want to put a friend, a loved one, a clergy, a member of the clergy, a therapist, you don't want to put them in a situation of mischaracterizing that this person is no longer in this child's life when in fact they are. So in that case, it's going to be very hard to get a non-custodial parent waiver.
Okay. Can you talk to us a little bit about whether or not we need to complete, if we're not applying for need-based aid, And so therefore thinking we're not going to complete the FAFSA or the CSS profile, but we want to be eligible for merit aid.
Great question. And I get it all the time. And there's a lot of incomplete information out there about this. You will hear, if you haven't already, that colleges require the FAFSA for merit aid consideration. It's untrue. I know of one college in the country, there may be one or two more. I know of one college in the country, Virginia Tech, not too far from your area, that does require the FAFSA for merit aid consideration, but almost no other colleges do. And here's why. Merit aid is a gift to full pay families for the most part to get them to apply and enroll. The families with need are getting need-based, either federal or institutional grants. But the families that are full pay are, what about us? How are you going to make it? How are you going to sweeten the pot for us? So they're not putting up barriers to those families. They're trying to make it as easy as possible. In almost every case, the college application for admission is all that is required for merit aid consideration. You don't have to prove on a FAFSA that you make $750,000 a year for you to be eligible for merit aid. The fact that your child checks, no, I'm not applying for need-based aid, and the fact that the financial aid office has not received the FAFSA and CSS profile makes you a great candidate for merit aid. One small exception, there are some specific scholarships on the websites of more than a few colleges that say for this scholarship, we require that you submit the FAFSA. But if you read the fine print, it's not most of the merit aid that the school is handing out. It isn't the President's Scholarship for which everyone is being considered. These are very specific scholarships in most cases. And they just want to make sure that they're not wasting money on you when you otherwise might be getting aid from the federal government or be in line to get other institutional aid. But those are exceptions.
Okay, I'm going to stray a tiny little bit and get into a topic that could be an hour-long discussion, but we'll just keep it very simple. We understand the financial implications of applying early decision, meaning primarily that you are not in position to compare financial aid packages from other schools when you apply ED and you're admitted ED, and then you withdraw from other schools because you will not have heard from them, and that's the requirement. But to focus on where we were before a minute ago, if you apply ED, are you still eligible for merit aid?
For merit aid?
Merit aid.
Yes, absolutely, and here's why. Colleges have ED programs in order to attract more applicants. In fact, they love ED, colleges do, because it gives them, obviously, the freedom to kind of cherry pick which extraordinary applicants they've got, and then they're locked in. Colleges love ED. If word got out that don't apply their ED because they're gonna stiff you on merit aid, that would completely undermine the college's intention of using ED as a way to build the best class they've ever had. So, it just doesn't make sense that colleges would do that, and they don't, and they go out of their way to repeat, no, this will not affect the merit aid we're offering you. That being said, maybe EA is around that. I mean, I don't know if there's any way of adding up the numbers to see. It's possible that EA, since they're not locking you in, may be around in which they're dangling bigger carrots in front of applicants, but they are certainly giving out merit aid during ED.
Right. I usually answer that question when asked that, of course, you're going to be considered for merit aid if you applied ED, because if a school is discounting and not giving merit aid to all of its ED applicants that normally does give merit aid, then it's going to be a New York Times article. And we're going to know about it. So, but of course, all our families know that not every school gives merit aid, period. And different schools give different amounts of merit aid historically. And all of that information is out there and available through on a spreadsheet that Jeff and Jenny Kent did do very well every year. And you can also check college data and have all that information there, the average amount of merit aid that's given by the certain college per year to the certain percentage of the incoming freshman class. So that information is available as for anyone who wants to find it. And of course, we can help you with that. So I think the FAFSA allows for 10 schools. What if I'm applying to 12 schools?
Another way that the federal government has made it a little more difficult than it need be. For I don't know what reason. I know a lot of stuff, but the answer to this question is a mystery to me. Why there aren't more than 10 lines on the FAFSA for colleges that the student is applying to. It's nuts. I'm like Diana and Wendy and Magda. I am also a college consultant, and most of my kids are not applying to 8, 9, or 10 schools. They're applying to more. So I wish they weren't, but they are. So this is how it works. It's clunky, but and it feels like, oh my God, I'm making a mistake, but it's the right way to do it. First of all, there is, you can Google, what if I'm applying to more than 10 schools? Go to the studentaid.gov response to that, and not to, Ivy this or college specialist that. Go to the source. But this is how it works. When your child receives the confirmation email, not that they've submitted the FAFSA, but that it's been processed, and that's usually within a couple of days. And that doesn't come to the parent. That comes to the child from the Department of Education. And most kids I know ignore that email. So make sure that you tell your kids, hey, if anything comes from the Department of Education, please forward it to me. Once they've been told within a couple of days, usually, that their FAFSA has been processed. That means that the ISIR, which is the college version of the FAFSA, the version of your FAFSA that they get, that means that the ISIR has been sent out to the colleges. It's now safe for you to log back into your FAFSA, which you can't do with the CSS profile. With the FAFSA, you can log back in and you go to the list of colleges and delete the number that you need. It's okay. Those colleges have already gotten your FAFSA. You can delete and then add the number of colleges that you need to. I do want to say one thing, Diana, about list order. Is this a good time to mention that? So the list order is 99% irrelevant. Other colleges don't see the schools that are on the list. It used to be, and Diana remembers this, it used to be that you had to be strategic about how you order the colleges, because for some crazy reason, every college would see every college that's listed on the FAFSA. Fortunately, that's gone. But there is one exception to this. There are states, if your child is eligible for state aid, and Diana, you spoke about that earlier, like DC TAG and other things like that. Then there are a handful of states, and I don't have them memorized, but you can also find this at studentaid.gov under, when you Google how to list colleges on the FAFSA, they will give you this information. There are a handful of states that require that an in-state participating institution be listed at the top of that list to qualify for state financial aid. So I just tell all of my clients, who can memorize that. So just go ahead and put an in-state public at the top, or if you're not applying to an in-state public, just put one of the better known in-state universities at the top if your child is in fact applying there, and that should suffice. And I can't really speak to, maybe you can, Diana, about DC and how that works, but in general, putting an in-state public or an in-state private at the top is important to do.
Well, we don't really have in-state schools, so it's the whole reason for DC TAG. So,
right, okay.
So Jeff, we've had a lot of questions generally about the CSS profile. People never heard of it before. FAFSA is out there all the time. And we know we talked to us about the DRT, the data retrieval tool for the FAFSA. Are there documents, are there things we need to prepare now? It's 3 weeks ahead of these forms coming out to, if we know the CSS profile, and we provided a link to see which, close to 200 schools require that. What should parents be gathering now?
The CSS profile is excuse me, is a far more complicated and invasive form. They're going to be just like the FAFSA, but in much more detail. They're going to be asking you about income and assets, parent income and assets, child income and assets. They'll even be asking you some things, and it's scary. They'll even be asking you about retirement accounts, which is so unfair because they're not including retirement accounts in the computation of your child's need eligibility. They just want to know that information. So a lot of parents freak out because they've got a lot of money put away in a retirement account, as you're encouraged to do, as is smart to do. And of course, you're afraid that if you reveal that number, it's going to take away from your child's need eligibility. It doesn't. It's not part of the formula. Colleges just want to know, in case down the road, maybe you're appealing the financial aid award and you're saying, no, we make so little, and he deserves more. They've got something to reference. No, you have $20 million in your retirement account. I'm sorry, we're not going to budge on giving your child any more financial aid than we've already awarded. So it's just giving them, they say, a fuller picture of your financial health. But not to worry, you should report it accurately, and it will not affect need eligibility.
What about a 529 plan?
Okay, so 529 plan is, think of it, if the parent is the custodian, if the parent owns the account, then it's for which the student is the beneficiary. That's a parent asset, not a student asset, unlike a trust, which might be controlled by somebody. A trust, if the student is the beneficiary, then that becomes a student asset. You want to avoid racking up student assets on the FAFSA and CSS profile because they're penalized at a much higher level than parent assets. 529, consider just like any other savings or checking account. It would be listed in the sum of all. You're not actually delineating every account. You're telling them the sum of all of your checking and savings accounts, and that would be included in that. Let me say one more thing, Diana. A lot of parents think that saving for college and seeing a 529 plan grow or seeing an investment account grow is counterproductive, and it's you're gonna take away every dollar that I've saved. Not true. The best way to afford college is to save for it. Here's why. Income is a big driver of need eligibility, but for every $1,000 that you've saved, that will raise your expected family contribution by $50, 105,000 by 50. It's 5%, between 5 and 5.5-ish%. 5 cents on the dollar is how you should think of it. You've saved $100,000. That will lower your child's eligibility for need-based aid by 5,000. What you're left with is 95 after that year. So I could see if they were taking away 25% of your savings every year, you might say, well, hold it. You know, after 4 years, it's going to be down close to zero. That makes sense. And that is what the penalty is on student assets. It's between 20 and 25%. The thinking is, what else do they have to spend their money on but us? But for parents, it's 5 cents on the dollar. Save. Don't be worried about seeing your assets, your savings grow. It's the best thing you can do to prepare for college.
Jeff, we have a parent asking about a student's Roth IRA.
A student's Roth IRA. So it's in the student's name.
Yes.
Now, we're getting near the edge of my expertise. I'm not a CPA, but qualified retirement accounts are not part of the need eligibility formulas. They may be asked about, but even for a student, it's not going to affect their need eligibility if it's a qualified retirement account.
Okay. Okay, so Jeff, I'm getting near the end of my questions here. And since these kids will be in school for the next 4 years, are there changes coming down the pipe that these parents should be aware of?
Yes, some big changes. A law was passed a couple of years ago, December 2020, which actually changes some important things about the FAFSA. Most of the provisions go into effect for the 2024-2025 school year. That would be the year that current juniors, high school juniors, are entering college, or current seniors are entering their sophomore year of college. So some of the big changes you should be aware of. This term that you may have heard of, you may be aware of already, EFC, expected family contribution. That's being changed, and it's just a name change to Student Aid Index, SAI. It was felt, and I agree with them actually, it was felt that expected family contribution leads one to believe this is what I'm going to have to pay and all the rest will be covered. Well, not the case. Expected family contribution is a number that the college uses to then determine how much of the difference the college is going to make up. So it's a misleading term, and it's being changed to Student Aid Index. Other important changes. In the case of, well, I should start with, there have been some wonderful, badly needed changes making the poorest people, the least the least fortunate in terms of the people who can least afford college. It's expanding Pell Grant eligibility to the lowest income families beyond where it is now. And it's making it easier for those families to qualify for federal Pell Grants. This is a great thing. I'm 100% in favor of it. Other changes. It's changing the way, no longer will the custodial parent be the one with whom the student has spent 50.1% of the year to date. The question is being changed to which parent has provided more financial support to the student. I think this is a fair change. I think it's a good change, because when it's roughly 50-50, so often the parent who is earning lots of money is shielded from the FAFSA, and the parent who maybe is a stay-at-home parent and earns very little, that's the only income that they are presenting on the FAFSA. It's a loophole, it's been a loophole for divorced and separated parents. So now it's the parent who has provided more support. Other important changes.
What about siblings?
Oh yeah. So there's currently a question: have you received any money from anybody other than your parents? And this has been the question where up through this coming FAFSA that opens October 1st, 2022, the question, have you received money from, or do you expect to receive money from anybody other than your parents? That's where the grandparent 529 payout to the student would normally have to be reported as untaxed student income. And that is a, that will kill need eligibility if those amounts are significant. They're doing away with that question, completely doing away with that question. No longer will a student have to report any money that's been given to them by anybody other than their parent. Now, this may be a relief to a lot of families. I think it's unfair. And here's why. Because of the next big change in the FAFSA, in the new FAFSA that takes effect 2024-2025, and that is up through this year, they would divide the family's expected family contribution by the number of siblings in college at the same time. So if the formula says a family should be able to afford to pay $20,000 a year, if there were 2 kids in college at the same time, each of those kids would share that $20,000. One would have an EFC of 10,000, the other would have an EFC of 10,000, and the sum is what the family was judged to be able to afford, which is always more than what they can actually afford. Well, they're doing away, in their wisdom, they're doing away with the division of number of siblings in college at the same time. So that family who the formula says can afford $20,000 a year, now each of those twins or siblings will have an EFC of $20,000 a year, totally unaffordable to the family. So I think it's a horrible change, but here's what may be a possible solution on the horizon. I'm hearing, I don't know this for a fact, that the FAFSA will still ask the question, how many siblings will be in college at the same time? Even though it's like decoupled from the underlying formula, it won't divide the EFC in half for each sibling. It still gives the institution the information that they may be able to use to give institutional need-based aid. And for many middle-income families, who are not qualifying for federal Pell Grants, the only need-based grants they're getting are from the institution. So it's possible that some institutions, because that law only covers federal aid, it doesn't cover institutional aid. So it may be that institutions, if they're smart, will continue to use that in their own calculations.
Okay. There's a question in the chat which asking you to confirm that if we've saved $100,000 and the school costs $60,000, we shouldn't assume that they will automatically take 60,000 of the 100K that first year.
So no, it doesn't work that way. So you've saved $100,000. If you earn $30,000 a year, that puts your income, which is the biggest driver of the student's eligibility for need, a $50,000 income even will put you in line for tens of thousands of dollars of need-based aid, depending upon the price tag of the college. So if you're applying to a college, well, I won't go into that's just too much in the weeds, but low income equals high need. Don't forget, $100,000 in savings will drive your EFC up by 5,000. The college doesn't take their cost. The formula is just determining what someone with your income and your assets should be capable of affording. And income is by far the biggest driver. Your assets, total assets, you will be contributing 5% of your total assets per year.
Okay. So Jeff, we're at 8:57 and you have been incredible. Thank you so much. Do you have anything you would like to say in closing? Are we, I should say to our families that Jeff also does financial aid consulting professionally. If you have personal situations that you would like to, that you need someone to help you along with, or that kind of work, I have referred families to him in the past because he's very, very knowledgeable and his information is available. He's a Big J Consulting on the web, his website, and he's if you Google Jeff Levy, you'll find him right away.
www.bigjay, the letter J, bigjeducationalconsulting.com.
Right. So thank you. Thank you.
Are there, I mean, if there are questions that are unanswered, I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes to answer them. But if you think that that's unfair to other families, then I'm happy to, to end it.
I think we're good. A lot of people are saying thank you, and I'm sure that we'll be contacting you, and you'll hear from individual families that have personal scenarios.
Okay, and I will say that I do a lot of blogging about these questions. So if you go to my website and just click on the blog link, you'll see probably too many articles about financial aid and college affordability, but I think you'll find some good information there. You'll also, on the resources page, find our 3 charts. One is domestic financial aid for domestic students, and you'll lots of ways to see who's got merit aid, who's generous with need-based aid, and we also have a pretty sexy ED versus RD acceptance rate chart.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and lots of luck to all of you figuring out this maze of financial aid. Good luck on your college applications coming up.
All right, take care. Enjoy California, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, good night.